Good day, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Performance Engineering Tools, September 13th, 2016, and it's a presentation by your local, actually worldwide, HPE Vivid Group. And it's basically the Vivid Performance Engineering Special Interest Group for Vivid, and the current leaders are Todd DeCapua, Petar Paskarich, Paul Shovlin, and Chris Trimper. And today's webinar is hosted by myself, Petar Paskarich, and Chris Trimper. The primary speaker is going to be Chris Trimper today, and he's an enterprise QA senior automation analyst with Independent Help. He's also the West Vivid chapter leader with over 10 years of experience in software QA, 8 years of writing test automation, and 4 of those years using HPE software, and currently manages a team of 5 QA engineers and is an awesome tech geek at heart. Myself, listed as current a senior leader performance engineering, but currently wrapping up a transition and hopefully have some great news by the end of the conference. We'll see. And I've been doing the performance engineering profession now since the infancy about 20 years ago, covering nearly every Mercury Interactive and now HPE QA tool member along the way. And I'll add some more highlights as we go through today. The panelists for today are Jonathan Wright and Mihai Grigorescu. Jonathan is the Director for Digital Engineering, and he's been with Hitachi for 15 years of international automation experience using HPE software with a number of global organizations. He is co-author of 2 award-winning and best-selling books, Experiences of Test Automation in 2012 and Advanced UFT for Engineers Cookbook in 2014. His research includes testing as a service model with epistemic and systemic entropy, and digital engineering, digital transformation, DevOps, lifecycle virtualization. He's accomplished and frequent keynote speaker at international conferences, several of those including Gartner in London, Star West for California, Star East in Orlando, and Fusion in Sydney, ANZTV Melbourne, Eurostar, and Unicom for BCS Sigis in London. He's also the winner of the HP Enterprise Innovation Award for World-Class Delivery in Prague of 2015, and the Quality Award for Innovation in Dublin of 2014. Mihai is with Accenture High Velocity Application Development, and he's development lead. He's a global HP practice alliance testing lead, working across all industries and geographies. He has greater than 8 years of testing services industry experience, more than 3 years delivery experience in large-scale IT programs. He's focused on TCOEs, the Testing Centers of Excellence, which I really love. 3 years delivery experience in large-scale other programs, SME subject matter expert, and international speaker for software testing and testing tools. He's been a HPE ALM CAB member for the Application Lifecycle Management Customer Advisory Board, and also an HPE Worldwide User Community member, the Vivid TQA for Testing and Quality Assurance Leader. And he's on the Accenture Vivid Steering Committee. So we have a great set of panelists today. All right, for the next bit, we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping for the audience. Just a reminder that this is a live session and it is being recorded for later broadcast. The recordings are available to all Vivid members for free. We are going to also do first set the session Q&A, and we're going to use the question pane. Okay, you can send those on the right-hand side. Next slide. All right, so Actually, I'm going to go back and cover where that is. Chris, if you want to go back one slide, I think it is. Here it is. This is a picture of the GoToWebinar control panel that usually appears in the upper right hand of your screen. To submit the actual question, make sure the questions pane is expanded, and you can type the question and click on Send. All righty, so let's get started.
All right, thank you, Batar, for that awesome intro. I'd also like to add that in addition to our all-star panel of performance engineering experts, we also have with us Todd DeCapua. And Todd, in addition to a plethora of accolades, is a co-author of the O'Reilly book, Effective Performance Engineering. So we have just so many awesome people with us today. So let's get rocking on our great topic today. Quick agenda, we're going to just take a quick overview of the HPE performance tools, go over what kind of tests that we have in our everyday lives, look at the tool classifications, specifically going into tools for performance engineering, and then a couple looks into mobile and to an unsung hero of some of the performance engineering tools, PAL. So as we look at performance with the HP tools, we have so many different tools out there, from Load Runner, Performance Center, Storm Runner, App Pulse, Network Virtualization, Service Virtualization, and Mobile Center. I'd like to turn to the panelists for a minute and allow us to just talk about some of these tools and what they bring to the table, and maybe even clear up a little bit of the confusion when somebody's out there maybe getting started with performance engineering or looking to grow beyond some small homebrew tool that they have and say, oh my gosh, there are so many different tools out there. Where do I start? What can they do for me? So Jonathan, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about what these tools bring to you and what they mean to you.
Well, thanks for the intro. What I've seen, especially in the what Hewlett-Packard Enterprise have been trying to achieve, is this unity between all of these distinct product groups. And what I've seen, especially in the last 5 years, is the amount of reuse. So obviously stuff like True Client, and also things like the network virtualization, which I know Todd was under the acquisition of Shunra. That now sits within each one of the product groups. And really what we're seeing is a lot more reuse. So kind of where I've been focusing on probably over the last few years is around lean engineering. So part of it is reducing waste. It's obviously that we're going to cover about shift left and shift right later in this presentation deck. But really these tools have a place where they're able to cover that entire life cycle. So the entire performance life cycle, which allows you to start doing performance engineering from day one. So you don't have to wait for an application to be built. So therefore, tools like Service Virtualization and the Lifecycle Virtualization Suite enable people to start thinking about performance and what performance means. Equally, tools like App Pulse and App Pulse Mobile are really focusing on that ops area where we're seeing with the whole cultural shift to DevOps and actually understanding the measure and monitor components, and again pulling that information across left. So what I've seen is the closer integration, introduction of True Client and lots of shared repositories, and Performance Center is really the banner that sits everything and brings everything together. And I think if you look to where Hewlett-Packard Enterprises are directing themselves with the vision towards things like CODAR and the newly released product Optane, which is the replacement for the traditional ALM Test Director product line, the integration points are just going to get better and better. So for those guys who are using continuous integration, or if you guys are doing TDD or BDD, really now there's a tool that will support you to get involved with performance engineering like you would do if you were starting with functional or non-functional testing. So, and I know we've got another expert on here on the panel who's experienced around functional testing and how they can bring that stuff in now and utilize the stuff that you're generating out of UFT. Equally, I'll be talking a little bit later about PAL, which is the Performance Application Lifecycle, where you can actually start taking logs and logging information to pull that in to Performance Center to create, a baseline for what kind of performance tests you should be running. So it doesn't matter what level of maturity you are. There's a tool that'll get you up and running very quickly, especially with Storm Runner now. That's, it's a huge, the entry point's just dropped considerably. So that's kind of where I've seen the shifts around and really the direction of where we're trying to provide tools that support scaled agile, lean engineering, and the next generation of performance engineering solutions.
Awesome. And Mihai, can you add into us for those folks so that they understand more what the path to adoption might look like with all the different tool sets? Where they might start and where they can eventually evolve to. So give them the glimpse of today, but also give them a glimpse of the future of where they can go with all of this.
All right. That's a very good point, Chris. So typically, what I've seen, and I think it's over 90% of the cases where I've been involved with teams on the ground, we traditionally start with testing with manual functional testing as the primary driver for testing. Then we move over into automation. Then we move over from automation into, okay, hang on a second, now we need to do performance testing. And from performance testing, the evolution is pretty natural to performance engineering. So to come back to this slide, we typically see people just working in silos and doing performance testing at the end of the project, as we know on the right-hand side of the project lifecycle. And they typically go for load runner, which is mostly meant for on-premises setup. It's meant for smaller teams, not global, not with a global reach or a global access requirement, which is then Performance Center, which is the upgrade from load runner to Performance Center as the next evolutionary step. And then Performance Center can be stood up either on-prem or in SaaS. And then we have lots of people around the world accessing Performance Center and executing performance tests across the world using a centralized license pool and host, etc. And now the move is from HP to from Performance Center to Storm Runner Load, which is a SaaS-based only application. So it's available only in the cloud, with load generators and the controllers that can be stood up on-prem as well. So it's a mix of on-prem plus in the cloud. And typically that's been the typical life cycle from load runner going to Performance Center, going to Storm Runner Load, or adding Storm Runner Load on top of Performance Center to complement with your spike testing whenever you have to do 1 million users for a Black Friday, for instance. And that has been traditionally made for, this has been traditionally the roadmap for any kind of web application or legacy. Now with the introduction of mobile testing and mobile app development, we see the trend going now into how do we actually do mobile testing and obviously performance testing and engineering for mobile devices. And that's where we have mostly, but not necessarily exclusive to Mobile Center, that's where we have network virtualization and server virtualization fitting in the picture quite nicely. And then obviously the App Pulse suite, which is the new monitoring buzzword from an HP perspective, that can do real user monitoring, synthetic transaction monitoring, etc., etc., etc. Something that you would used to do normally with RAM and BPM and everything else is now being done with App Pulse, which is much more cost-effective and much more easier to implement. So that, in a nutshell, is how I've seen in my line of work, in my experience, how testing is progressing from a basic level with low runner, going into Performance Center, going to Storm Runner, and then expanding the scope of services and performance engineering just from desktop and web apps to mobile testing and everything else that surrounds IoT.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you very much for that. And I think what we've done is we've been able to bring together, in a couple of minutes, just level setting, what is all the stuff that's out there from HP, because there's so much more beyond that, and that's what we want to open up into. I want to take a quick second and just look at the protocols, because every time I go and look at the protocols supported, and these are the protocols supported by the HP tool sets, and hopefully I didn't forget anything major. I know there are other tools out there that may support even beyond this, but it just makes that scope of what can we test, what do we test, and it just blows it up. And I thought, if anything, because these slides are going to be all available. The presentation is going to be available for folks to remember and go, gee, I've always been wondering if I can do any Windows sockets testing. Well, yes, you actually can, and there's really great protocol support for that in this tool and others, and it's documented well, and it's fantastic to use along with all of these other ones that are out there. I'd like to jump us into our first poll question. I'm going to hand over to Pitar to kick this off.
Yes. So let's see. The first poll here is whose tools do you use for performance? And you've got a selection there of, now, is 100% HPE performance tools across the board? Is it a mix of HPE and non-HPE tools? Are you 100% non-HPE tools? JMeter and other open source tools included, I bet, in there. Maybe you don't know, or you're not doing anything at all, and it's just none yet. And we'll quickly wait until we get, we have 80% voting in right at the moment. So let's go ahead and close that particular poll out. And the response we have here is basically, wow, okay, kind of what we thought. 46% is a mix of HPE and non-HPE tools, followed then by we're 100% HPE performance tool shop. Then basically the last one is the other ones are 23% at 100%. So yeah, it falls right in line with what I would see, and especially across the different organizations I've surveyed in the last 4 months in the field. So I was quite surprised at how many actually were 100% non-HPE tools. Chris, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first I'd like to comment on some folks will be asking, why is there a vivid polling question asking about non-HPE tools? And I probably should have mentioned that before the polling question. And it's more, if you've been focusing on what HP has been doing lately, there's been this shift where it's been less of how can HPE be this performance tool for your organization to be how can HPE fit into your organization as a performance tool or as a component of your performance tool testing. No longer is it everything. As we work more towards DevOps, as we shift left, as we continue to be continuous, there are so many other pieces that need to be a mix in here. And I'm really glad that there are a lot of individuals that are voting in saying that I'm using a mix, because I believe that they're getting the best of both worlds and they're really leveraging the tools to the best of their ability. And I'd also like to hear from Mihai and Jonathan about your thoughts on that, or even what you would have voted.
Well, I'll go first then, if you don't mind. I would have voted a mix. Why? Because in today's world, it is impossible to not find a heterogeneous environment where we've got a bunch of vendors that have sold tools to different environments and business units. And then those tools are now cropping up together and being integrated with each other to streamline your testing process. Case in point, you have Dynatrace, for instance, which is non-HP. However, HP with Storm Load now is integrating with Dynatrace as monitoring tools. So it's impossible again to find just one or another vendor on any client side. And with the proliferation of DevOps and the fact that open source tools are aimed at for many test organizations, you have to have that kind of mix. So you will have JMeter and Gatling talking to Stormrunner, for instance, to Stormrunner Load in the future. That's on the future roadmap. Whereas Performance Sensor would have to integrate with something else, for instance, that then would integrate with Git for version control, for your scripts and for your code. So everything needs to be mixed, basically. And that's pretty much what I have to say about that, like Forrest Gump said.
No, it's great, and I liked your comments as well. And it's something that I've been noticing where it's, now these things are integratable, where in the past, if you wanted to make two tools like Dynatrace and Stormrunner work together, you'd either have to find yet another vendor that happens to have that niche that makes them work together in some clunky way or build some interface. But now they're just bringing them together, and I definitely believe that HPE is listening to all of us as customers saying, what are you doing and what do we need to do to make things better? They're really becoming this awesome community tool set. Jonathan, can you also share your thoughts as to the tooling mix, please?
Absolutely. So I don't know if you want to skip on to the next slide, just so I can give a little bit better context around this.
Actually, a good transition, please.
So I caught up with Paul Gerard the other week, and he's just got back from I think Malaysia, and he's been working on a community site called Tools Knowledge Base, and part of that was this idea that there's so many different tools, especially as nicely pointed out, that especially with things like DevOps, the sheer amount of different tools that people are using between open source and commercial products is just endless. And if you go onto tkbase.com, which is a free site, there's over 100 performance tools there, and that's excluding all what we're going to be talking about today, all the additional peripheral tools, so all the monitoring and continuous integration. And those tools could be device monitoring, they could be around log file analysis in different environments, they could be just power tools or command line tools that people are using, it could be containerization, it could be about source control and versioning control tools that help the end-to-end integration and pipeline management. So partly around the challenges are around selecting a whole huge ecosystem of tooling that provides you with everything that you need in your toolkit. So actually I think this is really interesting because we are a mix, and like you said, organizations just by over the years have built up a whole stack of different tool sets, and some of them have not been utilized. Some are, have expired, and partly bringing that from a strategic point of view. So the strategic tooling, like for instance, the enterprise solutions within Hewlett-Packard, that will be a strategic decision within your organization, but there'll be a lot of tactical solutions and also some shadow IT as well, some stuff where people are downloading a new framework and they want to try a new tool, and that might be more JMeter or open source. So you're absolutely right. There's a whole ecology of tooling, which is a minefield to go through. So it's good for people to share what's worked for them and what kind of tools are out there, and how that mix and that blend works to get the job that you need to do. And we're going to talk about that today, and how the integration points now are essential for you to be able to do performance engineering effectively.
Oh, that's outstanding, and I was pleased to see this website just as one of many different features out there, just listing just the vast quantity of test tools out there for the performance realm. I thought of it as, I've been using HPE tools, but I have this thing I want to do, and I don't have time to go through a million different, search results. We have things cataloged in one easy place, and then also remembering that, when it comes to integrating, comes with working with it. There's places like ourselves, the Vivid Performance Engineering SIG, where we can, help out. We're more than just a group that does webinars. We are a online community that is ready, willing, and able to offer advice because we've all been there in the trenches working on this stuff. To continue the theme of going layer by layer in terms of what's out there, now what is it that we test? There are just so many different things that we can test, and this could probably be its own webinar, so we're going to kind of shorten it down to a moment or two. We can test databases and just so many different types of desktop applications, websites and different types of websites, mobile web and mobile apps, and then just so many other things. Jonathan, I'm going to turn back to you and just talk about how do you manage testing all these different types of things, because you're never just testing the database, you're never just testing an application. How do you handle testing the mix, and maybe even recommend a tool that helps you, or tools, and how does it bring it together and turn chaos into calm after the storm?
Absolutely. So you're absolutely right. We've got a whole mixture of different tools and technologies, and ironically, I did a webinar earlier today for upcoming Star West event around, and my example which I gave was around Pokemon Go. And I thought this was really interesting because it actually blended all of those components that you're talking about, but it did a very fresh perspective of it. So over the last few years, I've been focusing on smart city testing and IoT and the complexities around that. But if you take something as simple, or I say simple, or as complex as Pokemon, partly there's a whole database. So in this case, the example I was walking through was around generating synthetic data into that database so that you could populate it with crowd information around locations of Pokemon that would actually create GPX data that would power a device. In this case, it's a mobile device that takes GPS data. It also takes sensor data, such as gesture control, and also how you move the phone around, looking at the point of view through AR. Part of it is the complexity of the applications that we're testing now have moved away from simple desktop applications, and they're highly complex and highly difficult to test. And I think this is where the engineering practices are absolutely essential, is that you may look at something like Pokemon Go and think it's just a game, but in actual fact, it's more of a future platform for IoT. So we've got to support this, and we're going to start seeing going forwards these new types of difficult environments where you kind of think, well, how on earth am I going to do this? And this is where things like the Lifecycle virtualization tools come in, where you might have some kind of authentication which is only available in live, and you've got upstream and downstream ecosystems that you might have to interact with. So this is really interesting. It's a new challenge, and you're absolutely right. There's no one solution or one approach to that rules them all, and each time you're going to evolve the way that you performance engineer in and provide assurance around the testing that you do. And this is why I've kind of been sat around the digital assurance space and trying to understand, well, what is that? What does good look like? And I think we're going to talk a little bit around PAL later on about the fact that actually validating the customer-centric design and having the customer quick-fire customer feedback about how people are actually consuming your application is essential to validate what you think a good performance engineered test looks like, and what kind of blend and mixture and volumetrics are. Because if your customer experience is there's no kind of chance for making these kind of mistakes. Your brand now takes so much damage. It's got to be performance engineered from day one, and it's got to be rock solid. And I recently delivered, with exactly what I've just talked about, a project for Copenhagen, where we actually got crowd testing, crowdsourcing to actually populate people moving around the city. And then we tested the mobile application with 6 months of historical and synthetic data, a big data, call it a data lake for a second, to prove that when we launched this application in Copenhagen for 36,000 people, that they were able to walk around and populate information, do gamification, get on a leaderboard about how carbon neutral they were. And this was a huge challenge. It was equally a huge mind shift. In this particular case, we used a tool called Agile Requirements Designer, which is a model-based testing approach. And that allowed us to really use maths as the way to prove the model. So especially when you're looking at lean startup and lean UX techniques, it's all about proving experiments, so proving a hypothesis of a model, and that model is something you've got to develop. And there's a huge amount of tools that will help you with that, and that will help understand what you've got to do from a performance engineering point of view. So absolutely shift left, understand your requirements better, but actually start building and understanding models as soon as you possibly can.
Well, I can also add to that point. So and it's a bit of shameless marketing now, but we've actually posted a white paper with Accenture and HP jointly, which is called Shift Right Testing, and how predictive analytics helps us in the application lifecycle overall. And within that, just as you said now, we do have the ability to look into app pulse, into the real user transactions and the transaction response times and the resources consumption within those mobile devices, and then come back with the actual usage of the application, and then how that application fares against signal and battery consumption, CPU consumption, space, etc. And you'd be amazed to see how much of, and more importantly also with feedback from the Google Play Store and from the actual users who are utilizing that particular application. And you consolidate all that information using all these tools that are available out there. We essentially have actually developed a tool on top of AppPulse and Vertica to help with that, with data mining and analysis. And that actually gives you the actionable insights that you need to develop your application next. So you mentioned Pokemon Go, okay, which is a great example. But then how does Pokemon Go fare in some edge network with no 3G connection at half the battery, with half a battery and 2 bars of signal? And those are the things, those are the scenarios that you actually get out of the monitoring logs from AppPulse Mobile, and then you use network virtualization to simulate those network conditions. So it's super important to use all these combination of tools and not just go in blindly with what your BAs and other SMEs claim that this should be your performance benchmark, which is pretty much thumbs up at all times. And that's so important that you need to look at the bigger, broader spectrum of tools that you need to use within your ecosystem to actually have a proper performance engineering lifecycle.
Oh, outstanding! Thank you, guys. And maybe you inadvertently gave us a work reason that we can just go out, wander, and play Pokemon Go for a while because we're just, putting on that mindset to think how we can better test. I'm sort of kidding.
I wouldn't go there. I actually have a horror story from the States where a kid killed his brother for thinking that he had deleted his Pokemon Go profile. Meanwhile, he just signed out. And what's worse, the CSI guy that came, the crime scene investigator guy who came on site, passed even more ridiculous comment saying, well, he killed his brother for having a low profile. I would have understood if it was Pikachu or something of high level. Oh, and by the way, while I was on site investigating in the crime scene, I also found my own Pokemons. So it's not a funny story, but it is funny itself on how people actually can go mad with Pokemon Go.
Well, I think this is the thing where you say actually you're better off doing it in a test lab with synthetic data on real devices using mobile center, because that way everyone's safe, no one gets hurt, and you also get the highest score because you can just scale up and be running around for hours. So let's move into the VR and AR world in our environments, and I'm sure drones and everything will be coming quickly along afterwards. So. But it is a very exciting and complex. I think this is the thing is around complexity is, we've got to deal with so much complexity now that, we have to have huge dependencies. Even with Pokemon Go, you're logging in with, a Google account. Straight away, there's a dependency on another system. And that's why, things like Storm Runner and being able to scale up to the cloud, mobile center, be able to use real devices, suddenly our capabilities are so much greater than what they were, but part of it is leveraging those capabilities to provide more realistic scenarios that represent actual usage patterns. And I know we're going to go on, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I think this is why, especially the DevOps rule around monitor and measure is absolutely essential. And whenever I've spoken to people in the industry, like Alan Page, who works for Microsoft, partly they say, how quickly can we understand what our customers are doing and what we're seeing going out there? So people using the tool in different ways, using new features that have not been explored before, you need to get fast feedback. And whether that be through a tool like AppPulse Mobile or whether that be using your Splunk or another monitoring tool, it's really essential to get that information because that really provides validation that what we're doing is right and we've got the right kind of mixture together. And I think these are why these next steps are absolutely essential, because you've got to build realistic scenarios. And you're absolutely right. Around the NV area, part of it is you need to understand what happens if they have no signal, what happens if the battery's low, what happens if the camera's being used by another application, what happens, in very different discrete components. One of the things I talked about today in the Pokemon is the next big thing release. The Android version's actually going to have different functionality to the iPhone, which means you're going to have different scenarios and different test scenario mix. One to support buddies and a Pokemon Pro subscription function, and then in the iPhone variation, that functionality won't be there. And they're not planning to roll it out. So actually now we're having to deal with different functionality and different scenarios across the different platforms, which I think is just, it makes the complexity increase each time they do things like that.
It absolutely does. In fact, I do not envy being those testers, because their job just got that much more complicated. But you're right, all of this talks to one simple notion that I have, that is, once you release, the testing doesn't stop there. You don't just say, okay, I'm done, and I'm going to go start working on the next thing and forget about everything that was done. It is now a full circle ecosystem. It continues to change, evolve, grow, and if you don't have a good understanding of what's going on, you're going to be that person that gets dropped. Your app's going to be dropped from somebody's phone. And it's actually an awesome segue into what we're talking about next, and it's tool classifications and how those tool classifications and all of them flow together. And a real quick mention is, there's these 5 key classifications that we kind of put things into. There's data prep, there's the scenario building themselves, there's the test execution and the monitoring and the reporting, and this just keeps on going and going and going, and there's this big circle where they're all interrelated. And we kind of put it together something like this, where this is a way in which all of these flow together. And I know it looks like they stop, but really they continue to go and go and go. I didn't want to make this horrible diagram, but this is just a simple view of how they all can flow together, but they never stop. For examples in here, and then we'll touch upon them. Synthetic monitoring, we don't just stop there. We take what we learn from synthetic monitoring and bring it back. If you notice, an example of RUM is on both ends of this. So, RUM can help contribute, real user monitoring can help contribute to building tests, and it can be brought back down into the reports, but it's part of that whole system. This is a monster diagram, in my opinion. There's probably dozens of tools that can fit into each one of these. Mihai, let's jump to you and talk about how this flow goes together with, at a high level, with one of your projects.
Well, actually, I have an anecdote to share with you from my times in South Africa, where I was working at one of the telco companies there. I won't mention names; there's just one, obviously, so it's pretty easy to just Google and see who that is. And these guys were building a brand new portal for their client, it was a client-facing portal, and they had absolutely no idea how the performance should look like, and they called in some people that apparently knew what they were doing. They obviously didn't, and they started thumb sucking. They need 5,000 transactions per hour, and with these response times and so on and so forth. So they actually didn't have any actionable intelligence to base their facts on, and this is where we would start in from the left. So we would want to get out of the production environments, if you do have your system in production, and like these people, they did have it, but they just didn't monitor it properly. And we would want to capture all the information from your user monitoring and your transaction logs, bring them back into the development phase, and actually understand how your application needs to look like next in order to improve it, or in order to make it work just as good, hopefully, as before, which leads us to build scripts. If you don't have any information whatsoever, you would obviously have to start recording scripts from scratch, or at least think of how your benchmark should look like. All your scripts will be stored into Performance Center, and more importantly, you would want to keep them in ALM. Why? Because you want to have that holistic view of how many manual tests, functional tests you have, and how many functional and non-functional automated tests you have, and how many non-functional performance tests you have.
Mihai, I think we're losing your audio.
Oh, sorry about that. I don't know what's going on.
Oh, great, you're back. Continue,
okay. Please. Yes. So we move on from the script builders into building scenarios and link these scripts one to each other to perform end-to-end transactions. We execute those scripts into your QA environment and just record the results in there and analyze them. And we're not stopping there. So once we execute a script into QA, we will execute the exact same script pointing it to production, into operations, and this is where ShiftRight comes into the picture with OAT, with operational acceptance testing, where we're actually going to, again, use the same script into production in order to provide that synthetic monitoring data and to make sure that your performance in production is actually equal to your benchmark or scales up to what you have tested into QA. And of course, once you start executing in QA, you have your results, you have your load generators, you have pretty much everything that comes as an output out of your execution, which includes reports, log files, and transaction response times and everything else that goes with it. And you take that information and you make sure that the same information is collected back from operations, and everything goes back into development for improving your application overall. And I'm not even adding security in here, because you would also have to include, besides automation performance, you would also have to add mobile testing. You'd also have to add security. You'd also have to add test data management, test environment management. So there's a whole other layer of integrations that needs to fit into with your performance engineering tools. And I think I want to stop here because I can go on and forever like this. So.
Actually, so you did touch upon one thing that I think is a trend that we're starting to see, and if you could touch upon it for just a brief moment, because we have some other awesome content coming up, where you see performance tools and functional tools, the gap narrowing between the two of them. Because I think that's something that some companies may or may not be seeing yet, but I'm starting to see it, and I think you are too. So you take just a brief moment and just touch upon that, and maybe even an example with two tools that how you're seeing them bridge more together.
So you did mention now Octane, right? And how Octane is going to be the replacement of ALM.NET. Hopefully, with the whole, with the whole Micro Focus and HP going forward, we want to see Octane still coming up triumphant in the future. So we would want to take the backlog. Okay, so let's talk Agile. Let's talk on an Agile project. We would want to take an Agile approach, and we would want to take a user story that needs to be developed for a specific, or several user stories that need to be developed for one of your features to work correctly in the next sprint and the next release. You would want to create your functional test at the same time with your performance test. You don't want to create them separately. And there has to be that seamless transition between how do you test your UI and how do you test your backend versus performance at the exact same time. And in that case, you would want to use recording tools that will do two things. One, in Accenture, we call that touchless automation, and you've heard the scriptless automation and a whole bunch of other buzzwords flying around. But it's not sci-fi. It can be done. So use a recording tool to record your, like Sprinter, for instance, to record your exploratory tests. So therefore, you cover your manual functional testing. Use the same script to generate an automation script, and then use the same script to go and generate a Vue.gen script. Not all of them are seamlessly integrated. Of course, you will have to do a bit of work. However, if you follow this very simple rule, use Sprinter, generate an automated test, generate a performance test, you don't have to recreate reinvent the wheel every single time you need to go either into automation or into performance. And then with that, you can actually create your automation or your performance testing in the actual sprints, not outside of the sprints, or especially in waterfall, right at the end of your, right at the far right-hand side of your project lifecycle, which is not where we want to go to.
No,
I'm not sure if that answers your question. Yeah,
no, it does. And that's a great point in terms of not reinventing the wheel and trying to cover both bases at the same time. No, thank you for that. And I think what transitions nicely into this is, we keep mentioning shift left, and we have a great illustration that Jonathan helped put together, and I want to give him a chance to talk about this, and meaning, what does this whole shift left thing mean for performance? And I think this is where you're seeing performance engineering evolve within certain organizations. So Jonathan, if you can take us through this diagram, and also even mention a couple of the tools that might aid in a change from your normal performance world to a performance engineering, and the continuous mantra that you would have around your applications.
Excellent. So I won't steal the next slide intro, but the Effective Performance Engineering book is a great example of how we're seeing more shift left, performance engineering starting much earlier. So let me just talk a bit about the scenario. And at the bottom, you see the release, the continuous delivery pipeline. And I think we highlighted there around tools like HPE Octane, which is being built on top of the actual continuous integration platform, such as, in this particular case, Jenkins. And what we're seeing now is these tools are built on the continuous delivery pipe so that they can look at how we manage the entire application delivery lifecycle. So part of that is, how do you do what the industry is now calling pipeline as code? So the ability to build infrastructure as code, platform as code, performance as code, really, and then deploy into an environment which is got to be able to, especially with containerization, microcontainers, microservice architectures. We're seeing things being built in different times, as you said, in 3 different modes. They could be the core IT side, where it's infrastructure that already exists, where we can start talking about utilizing things like PAL tool sets, or that actually these services don't exist and they're part of some kind of scaled agile practice, or even to the point where they're actually prototyping, wireframing a concept where they haven't started a development activity. They haven't talked about what kind of architecture they're going to do, from whether it be service-oriented architecture or the API estate, whatever that might look like. So partly these tools and tools like service virtualization mean that you can start thinking about performance. So when your developers creating, they have an idea or a concept, and they say, okay, would this, would this service scale, or have we, we'll create a stub which, we reuse that SV component not only in the initial investigation and proving and prototyping, but we reuse that across the entire lifecycle. So we use that in Performance Center at the end, in testing environments, because as we go along that journey, we get more of the pieces of the puzzle. And we replace those tools. We're no longer reliant on SV and the tools that allow it to artificially change how the performance is in an environment. So a container could be running on a local dev's machine. They still need to think about performance and what they should be measuring. What happens if they change the architecture and it has a degrading effect, a new framework they've adopted or they're considering. So part of it is building it in from day one. So first day performance engineering and proving that the system is performant and thinking about non-functional requirements early on in the life cycle, but also learning from the right. And part of why I'm saying this is that innovation shouldn't just happen in these new agile, lean UX kind of, they should also happen in production. If someone has a large-scale platform which is rock solid, it could be a bank, and there's an opportunity to improve the performance, innovation should happen, and these tools allow things to be, all the learnings from the right-hand side are pulled across. They aren't just people going in and building new solutions without any understanding of performance engineering techniques. So this is why I think it's so exciting that we start talking about this whole landscape, ecology of just performance tools and techniques that we can apply to prove that the solution's going to work and quickly validate that that's correct, whether that's using quick continuous integration and delivery across the pipe into environments with, you know, SV and NV and even NFV, so network function virtualization, proving that the architecture is going to be scalable to their end client customer things, and also learning from the systems that they have in place. So, you know, I think this is something which is going to mature, and I'd like to kind of hand it over to kind of Todd to talk a little bit, if he's got an opportunity around maybe some of the stuff that they learned from the O'Reilly book, really.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'd like to remind people that books are tools as well. A tool does not have to be a piece of software, because, you know, these books are out there for us to learn from. And Todd and Shane put together an excellent book that really gives us wonderful overview of performance engineering. And Todd, take it away and talk about how your book can be used as a tool for folks.
Sounds great. Thank you very much, Jonathan, for the introduction, and also Chris. I think, you know, as I think about this entire conversation of, you know, performance engineering and the tools associated with it, hopefully what everybody's been able to pick up on, this is a much bigger conversation than just one tool that maybe you're used to using over the last long period of time. There's actually a number of different facets that we touch on within this book, starting with things like culture. So again, O'Reilly has been nice enough to offer it up for free. You can download an electronic version of it today. If you go out to the website that Chris listed here on the slide, you will see a lot more information about the book, but also be able to get a electronic copy of your own as well. So again, all I would do is just, you know, go check it out, have a read through. It's something that, again, Shane and I have had on our mind for a while. Finally got to putting paper to pencil, or vice versa, and then this was released in June. But you know, as far as Mihai, Jonathan, myself, Petar, and Chris, I mean, everywhere we've gone, it's kind of, this has been opened up with a great excitement, because for a lot of people in the performance space, it's helping others to understand what is effective performance engineering and what are some of the key things that you can start to implement. This book is only 111 pages long. There's a lot more that can be filled in, but the objective is to give you a very nice, concise, and clear vision of what is effective performance engineering, so that you can get started, especially as we're coming off of this idea of a continuous performance engineering, and what does that mean left, right, and everywhere in between. So again, Chris, I'll hand it back to you for the next slide here.
Yeah, and as we're in this what is our back to school season, what better time for all of us to pick up a book and read it. And frankly, many of you are probably thinking to yourself, geez, I have next year budgets to start planning, and I need to figure out where I can take performance. How do we get better? If apps are your key to your industry, how do you get more stars in the app space? If it's a website and you want to know why people are abandoning your website, if you want to know more and learn more, pick up the book. Hopefully by the end of this webinar, you can have a little bit more feel of what's available for you out there to plan for. Mihai provided us this awesome slide. Unfortunately, we are running a little short on time, so we don't have tons of time to go over it. But if you can just summarize what this slide is meant to help out and to plan for individuals. Like, consider this a reference card for people. What can they take away from this, Mihai?
Sure. So the key takeaway from here is that, looking from a testing perspective, from the center going left and going right, one needs to cater for all these blocks in terms of tools and methodologies and skill sets, in order to actually provide a full end-to-end DevOps framework, so to speak, with continuous delivery, integration, testing, and operations. and from a performance engineering perspective, that everything is linked in between. There's no such thing as just doing performance testing or performance engineering in isolation from all the other disciplines like automation, mobile testing, security testing, lifecycle virtualization, or analytics and monitoring. So I'm going to stop right there. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, and whatever we discuss today lend itself to this picture anyway. So.
Oh, for sure, and hopefully this is something that people can take with them along with the other slides and use it as maybe a reference to how they are doing with their own adoption of performance engineering. I know we are running a little close on the hour, but we have a couple things to fly through fast. We do have a polling question. We're going to fly through it fast so people can vote, do a quick 30-second vote on this, and we'll take 1 minute and talk about mobile.
Okay, yes. So if you can select from the topic here, it's around performance testing mobile. And whether you want to, say you have a mobile app and we do performance test it, we have a mobile app and we are planning on going to test it, or we have the mobile app but we don't even really care and we're not going to performance test it, or we don't even have a mobile app, or I'm simply unaware of any mobile apps that my company has. So this will be an interesting one to see how it pans out. You're saying 72% voted. We'll give it another 2-3 seconds, see if anyone else wants to participate. And then we'll go from there. So it looks like, yeah, things are stabilized. So go ahead and close that one out. And as the results come back, we've got the winner is we have a mobile app and we do performance test it. So that's an excellent trend. Followed closely by we have the mobile app and we plan to do it, 23%. And then 15 and 15 for the next following two for we have one, we don't test it, and we don't have an app. And finally, 8% are unaware of the mobile apps that the company actually has. Again, very quickly, I'd say this follows in line with pretty much what I've seen across the industry I'd say the last 2 years specifically. And yeah, and it's great. At least, we're looking at mobile as a strong indicator of all the complexities that are involved with application infrastructure and also user interactions. So that all has to be tested. Back to you, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Petar. And if you think about mobile, I feel that mobile, along with some web, has been the key to driving performance engineering practices. If it wasn't for people going, well, this app didn't react fast enough, I'm just going to ditch it and find another one, because there's always going to be another thing in the App Store that does something similar. I think mobile is a very challenging thing to test because there are so many components of it. Jonathan had an awesome conversation with us about Pokemon Go, where some of us just think, well, it's just some silly game on a phone, but it's not. It's this horribly complex beast that has so many layers to it that we need to work on. And you notice we have this optimized build monitor flow. There's so many different components to it, but if we narrow it down to very simple aspects of testing for mobile, it's some of these key features. And it's a continuous cycle. It should never stop. It should always continuously evolve. Jonathan, do you have any other additional points about this?
Oh, no, I think that's absolutely great. And I can do a quick whirlwind through PAL. And, it's interesting because you say about the Pokemon Go, the Harry Potter Go thing is the next big app where people are walking around with wands. Things is mobile trends seem to explode. And part of that is they're quickly understanding what the customer's wanting, and then these applications start taking on a whole new dimension. And I think with things like VR becoming something that of VR, AR, and becoming MR, partly we're going to start testing even more complex stuff with VR headsets. So the complexity and how we performancely engineer building this stuff is just going to get more difficult. So, partly what I want to talk about for like 30 seconds before we open into questions, and I'm going to actually credit Wilson Marr, who's actually on the call for this content. That actually this tool, if you've utilized it before, it's in the additional free components if you install Load Runner or Performance Center on a machine. The second disk has performance application lifecycle tools on, which are very quick, very easy to use. And what they do is they allow you to extract a data set from whatever infrastructure you're using. So whether that be the Google Analytics world, or it could be your traditional Microsoft stack, or Apache logs, or web trends, you can pull that real usage of what your actual customers are doing, and then you can look at a duration, you can pull that up, and it straight away will build you a template of a whole usage pattern based on lots of different sessions hits, lots of visitors. That will give you the baseline to actually create and run tests and integrate those into your continuous delivery tool. So that could be, a Jenkins kind of environment, or it could be something else. But what's really important is that you're pretty much comparing your results, what you get from execution within your test environment, directly and correlating directly with what's going on in production. And we're going to start seeing this shift hugely. Testing in production, the shift right stuff, it's coming along, it's going to happen. So we need to think about how we test this and how we test more accurate. So with that, there's another opportunity at a later date to go through just the huge capabilities around that tool set, which I think is sometimes not really brought to light. And I'll probably hand over on to kind of the helpful links, and then we can go into some questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonathan. Mihai, I'm sorry we missed you on the mobile. If you, getting to the helpful links, want to say a quick 30-second on your take on mobile performance and its importance, and just give somebody this is why it's so darn important.
Well, as Jonathan said earlier, mobile, pretty much everything will be mobile, or if it's not mobile already, will be mobile in the next few months and years to come. So it is so important to make sure that first of all, your mobile apps don't bomb out. Well, if it's Samsung, it's going to bomb out on its own as the device explodes. But yeah, that's a different story. And more importantly, for gaming purposes, you will consume so much of bandwidth. The applications will be so resource intensive that you need to do performance engineering before you go to production and launch all these apps through the App Store. So there's no way to circumvent this. You need to do mobile testing. You need to do performance testing on your mobile apps and for your mobile devices. And with the extension of IoT, connected cars, connected fridges, connected appliances, whatever else you have in your day-to-day life, you have to do performance engineering and you have to do performance testing on all those devices. And I think that's my key takeaway. I mean, I can talk some more, but I don't want to because we don't have time.
No, thank you very much. And you're right. It is just so important from just wherever you are in the space for your customers, if it's mobile, desktop, web, even if it's on-campus software that supports people via the phone, there is some level of software that you likely have that needs your focus from a performance aspect. We wanted to leave you, before we get to the fast Q&A, with a couple of links that will help you out. A couple of HPE software links, just an example of the great help center that is available for Load Runner. A reminder that there is a community edition of Load Runner if you haven't had a chance to play with it, or if you want to tinker some more, there is a community edition available where the protocols are open to you for testing with a small limited number of virtual users for testing. Some links that we've mentioned, TK-Base, the link to the performance testing results, and you can always scour the site for more things and or recommend tools. Ranking of performance testing tools we hadn't had a chance to discuss from IT Central Station, which goes over the top 20 performance testing tools and the reasons why they have those specific ranks. Another reminder of the Effective Performance Engineering site, and where you can also go and get your free copy of the PDF book. And then more information just from Vivit and the Performance Engineering SIG, where you can find the Performance Engineering section of HPE software, the TechBeacon Performance section for TechBeacon online articles, blogs for Load Runner and Performance Center, and the Vivit PE-SIG site. So Pitar, do we have any questions? We probably have time for maybe one, unfortunately. Is there a number one question that we should chat on?
Chris, sorry, I have a question for you and Peter. So, Peter, so because we discussed about this a few days ago, should we do maybe a demo on Apple's mobile and Apple's suite, the entire suite, and how it impacts on performance engineering, maybe?
At least my personal answer is the should we? I would say yes, because even as back when I was actually working with HP to help bring those products actually to market and doing some R&D and some customer advocacy with them, as far back as like 2.5 years ago, it's a very powerful tool set, and it can accomplish a vast amount of performance testing and performance engineering goals. So yeah, I think it'd be great to do a session, and it would be one that we'll probably, I would say, push for going into next year, since the rest of this year's particular sessions, I think, have already been laid out. But yeah, it's something that'd be great to go into.
Yes,
and then eventually, good.
I'll say we definitely do have some great topics to end up the rest of the year. And I believe HP has already done a couple of webinars on that can be seen. But yes, I think this is laying the pavement for future deep dives into areas, for sure. But no, great point, Mihai. Pitar, did we have any questions from the audience? I know we're really over.
Yeah, we had actually one question, which I'm not sure if anyone really has an answer to yet, except for HPE management, which basically is just the rather ominous question of, what about Micro Focus? And I will probably leave that to others to discuss.
I'll take a stab at that because I kind of am in the middle of all of it as well. It's going to be a good move for HP going forward. That's the official story, and we know that Micro Focus is going to invest more and more into the HP tools because it's a pure software play. And at this moment in time, whatever we have out there going on with ALM, PC, Stormrunner, etc., it still carries on. There's been no announcements as yet from Micro Focus of sunsetting on any of their software. We know from a historical perspective that Micro Focus is not sunsetting any of their apps that they purchase over. So I think that for the time being, we're in a business as usual space until further notice.
No, I would absolutely agree with that. That's a feeling that I've been getting as well. Cool. Any other questions, Pitar, from the community?
At this point, no, there is not. It was rather quiet.
Well, hopefully that means we gave people all kinds of great information. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Reminder to go to the Visit Worldwide website and specifically the Performance Engineering SIG to find the recording of this and other webinars that we've done. And you're always welcome to ask questions through our SIG page if you have anything that does come up after the fact. So it's been great having this opportunity to talk with everyone, and hopefully gave you some great things to think about and maybe even plan your upcoming projects. So thanks, and have a great day, everyone.